Hello everyone. Today we're going to learn about cell theory, which is topic 2.1 in the IB biology syllabus. We're going to go statement by statement so that we know everything we would need to score perfectly in this section of the final exam. So let's jump right in. The first statement is outline cell theory. In order to do this, we would need to memorize three simple and fairly obvious statements. Number 1, all living things are composed of cells, or cell products. Number 2, the cell is the smallest unit of life. And number 3, cells only arise from pre-existing cells. The second statement asks us to discuss the evidence for cell theory, which means that we have to explain how we know the three statements of cell theory are true. Well, first, we know that all living things are composed of cells because we have microscopes, and so we can obviously see that everything is made out of cells. Secondly, we know that the cell is the smallest unit of life because of experimental evidence. It has shown us that nothing smaller than cells can survive. For example, a prokaryotic bacterial cell can survive by itself, while any of its organelles would not survive if we took them out and put them in a petri dish. Lastly, we know that cells only arise from pre-existing cells because of experimental evidence. Once more, we have never seen a cell form by itself. It is always produced through cell division. Next, we need to say that unicellular organisms carry out all of the functions of life. But in order to do this, we need to memorize the 7 basic characteristics of living things. Fortunately, there's a mnemonic device that can help us memorize these characteristics. The mnemonic device is Mrs. Gren. So MRSGREN, which stands for movement, reproduction, sensitivity, growth, respiration, excretion, and nutrition. We're going to look at these 7 characteristics in humans so we can better understand what they mean in the context of the real world. Movement in humans is pretty much walking around and searching for food and shelter. Reproduction in humans means that we need to sexually reproduce so that humans don't go extinct. Sensitivity means that living things need to be able to respond and interact with their environment, so in humans, an example would be a person feeling cold and putting a sweater on. Growth in humans is also a very obvious one. When we're small, when we're babies, we're small, and then we eat, and then we get bigger, and so we grow. Respiration, in terms of the characteristics of living things, is more related to cellular respiration than to breathing. It pretty much means that living things use substances from their environment to make energy. So an example in a human would be, someone eating some pasta and then getting some energy, also known as ATP, from the carbohydrates in the pasta. Excretion is also pretty simple. Humans need to get rid of waste, so therefore we pee and we poop. Nutrition in humans is also pretty straightforward and relates to respiration. In order to survive, we depend on gathering food from our environment. Next, we need to compare the relative sizes of molecules, cell membranes, viruses, bacteria, organelles, and cells using appropriate units. For that, we need to memorize that a molecule size is approximately 1 nanometer, a cell membrane's thickness is approximately 7.5 nanometers, a virus is approximately 100 nanometers, a bacteria is approximately 1 to 5 micrometers, organelles are smaller than 10 micrometers, and eukaryotic cells are smaller than 100 micrometers. Memorizing all of those sizes can be a bit challenging if you're memorizing the rest of the IB syllabus. So if you want to simplify it a bit more, if you can't memorize all of them, you should at least know that from a molecule to a virus, you're talking in terms of nanometers, whereas from a bacteria to a eukaryotic cell, you're talking in terms of micrometers. Next, we're going to have to be able to calculate the linear magnification of drawings. This requires memorizing a fairly simple equation, which is magnification is equal to size of image divided by actual size of object. In the IB, we would be given 2 of these variables, and we would be expected to find the third variable through the use of simple algebra. Next, we are asked to explain the importance of the surface area to volume ratio as a factor limiting cell size. The basis for the importance of this ratio is the mathematical fact that volume increases faster than surface area. Therefore, if a cell is larger, the surface area to volume ratio decreases. This makes metabolism within a cell less efficient because it takes more time for particles to move inside the cell, and the amount of particles a cell is able to absorb through its membrane is proportionally less than the smaller cells. The inefficiency of cells that are too large leads to most cells being pretty small. The next statement asks us to know that multicellular organisms show emergent properties. The concept of emergent properties is a pretty simple one. It clarifies that smaller parts interact with each other in order to form more complex parts, which then again interact with each other, and so forth, so we have a fully formed multicellular organism. In the context of the real world, this means that cells group together to form tissues, organs are then formed from these tissues, and then the organs interact with other organs in order to have organ systems, and the organ systems carry out all of the life functions required by an organism. Next, we need to be able to explain that cells in multicellular organisms differentiate in order to carry out specialized functions by expressing some of their genes and not others. This means that stem cells develop into specialized cells such as neurons or epithelial cells. The process of differentiation involves chemical signals which lead to some genes being activated while others are left inactive. Active genes are expanded by these chemical systems, while inactive genes are condensed. So you can only use the genes that are expanded, and you can't use the genes that are condensed. Next, we need to state that stem cells retain the capacity to divide and have the ability to differentiate along different pathways. This pretty much means two things: that stem cells can replicate forming more stem cells, or they can differentiate into specialized cells. Last but not least, we need to outline one therapeutic use of stem cells. One of the most common uses of stem cells are found in the form of bone marrow transplants from cancer patients who are immunocompromised as a result of chemotherapy. This means that bone marrow of a donor is transplanted into the patient. The result is that the patient now has a healthy bone marrow, which is important because all blood cells come from the bone marrow. And that is all you need to know to get a perfect score in the 2.1 section of our final IB exams.